Hello and thanks for joining on this glorious and amazing day. Understanding tears. Although tears is something physical, it's wet, you can touch it, it's tangible. Yet it's a little bit abstract because it's connected to emotions, and that's why there's so much confusion, especially to those that do not study psychology or those that are still following the paradigm of hundreds and thousands of years where they shunned and they laughed from something that they did not understand. A piece of wood you could understand because you can hold it. A tree you can understand because you can hold it. Emotions can be very, very complex, and therefore children get deeply abused at times because parents are just following the understanding of tears, understanding of emotions, understanding of crying, what they were programmed by their parents, which they were programmed by their parents thousands of years ago. It is literally hundreds, if not thousands of years that we understand emotions. Yet it's so painful to see that the masses still don't know how it works. The masses still don't know how it works. Understanding tears, there are what I could think of now. I didn't study this in depth. This just came to me as a revelation when a client of mine asked me on a coaching session this week, "Why did you cry by last session?" I'm not scared of tears. I cried. I explained them the reason why. And as I'm talking to them, this epiphany just came downloaded, which in the last 5 years, most of my ideas is from my clients or just from ideas that just fly into my head, epiphanies that I have no clue where they came from. Sometimes it scares me, it's overwhelming, but I appreciate it and I love it and I'm very, very grateful for it. So let's get straight to the meat. There are 6 types of tears. But before we talk about the 6 type of tears, let's give a little introduction of how emotions work. So there's a few levels of emotion. Level number 1 is when it's very quiet. Person day to day, of course, there's a little bit of a feeling, but there's not too much. Then there is, which I'm not going to explain now, then there's the level of emotions that keeps on creeping up and up. If you want to use an analogy, the way I understand it is with analogies, is electricity. You have a wire connected. And if you take the electricity tester to test if there's electricity in the wire, like when I do electricity, even though the switch is shut down, I will always test the wires that I work with. And if there's any electricity flowing, it is going to beep. The tester is going to beep. And the light will go on red, beep, 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 beep. Everyone has different types of testers. What that tells you is that there's flowing electricity through the wire. And there's a hot, big time going on. Now, but there's very little electricity. So when you're using, let's say, a blender, or you're using a device, then you start sucking out more electricity, because then the voltage is a little bit higher. Emotions works the same way. When a person is sleeping day to day, there's not too much emotions. When there's something going on, the emotions go higher and higher. I never read this anywhere, but the way I explained it to myself and to my clients, that there's 10 numbers within emotions. And I'm soon going to break it down into the 6 levels of emotions, tears. It's a 1 to 10. So I'm a little bit emotional, more emotional, and it goes up to number 10. Until it goes up to number 10, you could see an expression of emotions on the person's face. And sometimes if you look at their throat, you could see they're getting emotional. Sometimes their eyes well up with tears. A little bit. What happens after number 10? After number 10, the emotions become overwhelming, and that causes the tears, that causes the crying. So after you listen to this short series, you'll understand there's always a reason why a person cries, even though we were taught there isn't a reason and people are just looking for attention. But this is going to be difficult, especially for those that don't want to believe that our parents and grandparents ever made a mistake. But for those that are open-minded, will actually love this information. Once they hit number 10, it's like a pot overflowing and the water has nowhere to go, so it overflows. The emotions it cannot handle. So I forgot to categorize them. One is a quiet level of emotions that you don't even know it's happening. One starts rising till number 10, which is like the wire pulling electricity. Number three is when the emotions get so high that it actually, besides swallowing of the throat, besides an expression on the face, besides a little bit of welding, the person actually cries. There's tears that flow. How would that work with electricity? It's not the healthiest, but sometimes you could touch the wire and it's not room temperature, it actually gets hot. What is the fourth level, which we will not address today? The fourth level is when it doesn't just flow over, it becomes so intense. And that's where I love electricity, because that explains it to me. That's where I understood it. Is where the emotions become so intense that it shuts down. So it's not that the wire gets hot and very hot and then begins to melt. The way we set up electricity is that there's a breaker. In the olden days we used to have the fuses. What is a breaker? The breaker senses that when the wire gets too hot, we don't want a fire, we don't want it melting, and therefore, poof, the breaker goes off and the electricity stops totally. That's what happens in trauma. That's what happens when things get extremely overwhelming. The person literally shuts down. People could be bleeding. People could go through war. People could go through horror. And they shut down. And I'll finish up a short story about 11 years ago when my nephew, Levi, didn't wake up, a 9-year-old boy. One morning his mother went to wake him up. And she tapped him on the shoulder, on the upper arm. And as she tapped him on the upper arm, it was cold. If a human is cold, you know it's over. When I found out about it Saturday night, I did not cry. Why didn't I cry? That's what they call shock. Shock means it has went up to number 10, it surpassed the level of tears, and it went straight to the peak, like number 4, where electricity breaker just click. It just stops the flow of electricity and it shuts down. I packed up my family. No big plans. The funeral was tomorrow. It was tomorrow morning, Sunday morning. 9-hour drive from Toronto. Went into the van, give or take. 9 o'clock. Drove my 9 hours. I had all the time for myself. I was thinking about it, straight besides which highway I had to turn off and on. But that's always on my mind. Why didn't I cry? The person that's so comfortable with emotions and tears. Because at that moment, my body hit the highest level of emotions, where that's where it totally shuts down. So these are the 4 levels of emotions. Tune in next week and we'll begin to talk about the 6 reasons of why, how we reach that number 10 that brings to tears and brings to crying. Thanks for listening, and have yourself a wonderful and delightful day. And always remember, this time we'll change it. You are normal. You are normal. Maybe you were trained to think you're not, because after listening to the series of how emotions work and the 6 levels of crying, you'll have a very different perspective about your crying, about your children's crying, and we will never abuse children and say, that's what you're crying for? That's what you're crying for? I'll give you a reason to cry. Stop. No. I am not going to listen to you till you stop crying. No, I can't. I told you, I cannot listen to you till you don't stop crying. Okay, that's it. You know what? If you don't stop crying, you're going to your bedroom. At that moment, when it was done to us or we do it to our children, we have screwed up their program to a level that you can't even imagine. That's where people start questioning themselves. That's why people think about that they're crazy or weird. And those same children come to their parents in their teens and they go, I think I'm different. I'm thinking, why would you think so? You're normal. Well, you forgot when I was 3, when I was 7, you told me that wasn't the reason what to cry. But I'm not here to mock. I'm here to talk about the reality and the mistakes that humans gave over by the millions, by the billions from generation to generation. And now we are so fortunate that we understand how this abstract concept of emotions, tears, and crying. And I'm so happy to share it with you. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Have yourself a wonderful and delightful day. Bye now.